Welcome back to another video of the Insta360 One R. We're going to be giving some love to the 4K mod this time around. I'm going to be going over what I think are some of the standout features of this aspiring GoPro replacer, and whether or not it will in fact replace my GoPro. Since this is an action camera, let's start with some action targeted frame rates. Apart from the standard 30 frames per second, you also have 60, 100, 120, and 200 frames per second. To me, this is a pretty mixed bag, and I'm not really sure about the 100 and 200 frames per second options. Perhaps Insta360 is just thinking about their sometimes forgotten PAL users. I was once one of them. Still, it would be nice if there was an option to just switch between PAL and NTSC frame rate modes, rather than just getting an awkward mix of both. TV standards aside, let's check some footage. I was unable to make it to the skate park today, so I decided to film various parts of my commute via e-bike. With the 4K mod mounted to my handlebars, here's some raw slow motion footage from today's ride through the town of Ocean Beach. Now you may have noticed that there's no sound in any of these clips. Here's where I have to give my first real negative comment about this camera. Just like with the 360 mod, all footage must be imported and exported through the Insta360 One R app. Also, anything that is over 100 frames per second is annoyingly pre-rendered in slow motion and without any audio. 4K 60 frames per second is the only high frame rate mode that exports the original clip. The 4K 60 clip did include audio, but I decided to mute it anyway because it was a pretty bumpy and windy ride and I just wanted to save everyone's eardrums. But really, I was extremely disappointed to find this out. This really limits the flexibility you have when using an editing suite like LumaFusion or Final Cut Pro. One small workaround I found for the 1080p 120 frames per second footage was to speed up the clip by 4 times in the Insta360 One R app before exporting it. This manages to retain the audio and then gives you the option to speed ramp the footage if you choose to do so. I was sadly unable to do the same thing with the 200 frames per second footage, as it does not divide equally into a 30p timeline. I would keep getting an error message when my export got to 99.9%. So practically speaking, you do still get your buttery smooth slow motion footage, but you just don't get the flexibility that you would have if the app didn't pre-edit the footage for you. Until there's a firmware update, we are currently stuck with this method. Let's move on to something that wasn't even on my radar today, and that was the time warp feature. This is the 4K mod's take on a hyperlapse, which is basically a moving, stabilized time lapse. Where I previously complained about the app pre-editing, I'm about to praise the app for doing exactly that. Once the footage is exported from the app, you are left with a buttery smooth time warp that looks totally different to what you see before you export the clip. The app applies a gorgeous blur effect that mimics the cinematic motion blur that you would usually associate with a more professional camera. I had no manual control once I was in time warp mode. The next 2 clips you're about to see were produced by the AI that was built into the app. The first clip is my ride to work in the morning, and the second clip is my ride from work to the Amazon locker. And just speaking of motion blur, I was actually picking up an ND filter from one of my Sony a6400 lenses, but that's for another video. Let's roll the clips. Lastly, before I give my final opinion, I want to talk about one of the lesser uses that people would associate with action cameras, and that's vlogging. Let's jump over to the 4K mod once more, so you can see how this action cam could actually become your everyday cam. So this is an indoor vlogging test using a standard selfie stick handle. I've got the Insta360 One R and the 4K mod in a case, just to give a more accurate representation of what the audio is going to sound like out of this camera. You might hear a little bit of handling noise. If you need to improve your audio, the best thing you can do is add a low pass filter in your editing suite. That's what I'm going to do from now on. As you can hear, it sounds way better. Previously, in other action cameras that I've used, you've had to set your digital lens before you hit record. Now, once you upload your Insta360 One R footage into the Insta360 One R app on either iOS or Android, you can now select which mode you would like to export your video in. You can do wide plus, wide, linear, or even narrow. I would probably recommend, if you're doing a vlog style video like this, that you set your mode to linear. What this is going to do is straighten out the edges and make everything look a little bit less distorted, like a fisheye, as this is a fisheye lens, of course. For the purpose of this indoor footage, I'm also shooting in log as well. I wouldn't normally shoot in log. I think the colors out of this camera are pretty good as they are, but this does give you a little bit more flexibility again in post if you do want to do some color correction. But I find that in low light situations, like my apartment, which is quite dimly lit in most areas, having the ability to play more with the dynamic range just makes the image a little bit easier to see at a lower ISO. I tend to not go over 400 usually with an action camera. At a push I will go 800 ISO, but right now I'm using manual settings, so 400 is what this camera is currently locked to. And I think the image looks pretty good considering it is horrible fluorescent lighting and there's only that one up there and that one up there and then that one right over there. So not the best lighting situation in the world, but we're making it work. I'm genuinely amazed by how decent the audio quality and the image quality is from such a tiny camera. The big question is, will it replace my GoPro? Honest answer, yes. I do not want to carry around two different action camera systems. The 4K mod does 95% of what the GoPro does, but does 100% of what I used my GoPro for. I would film most of my clips in 4K 60 frames per second, and every now and again I would dabble in 1080p 120 frames per second. But that was very rare. For me, 200 plus frames per second is a little bit of a gimmick, and I personally haven't found a practical use for that level of slow motion. With these small camera sensors, you are always going to be trading image quality for those higher frame rates. And I would rather my audience have a sharp, detailed image than a smooth, softer, less detailed image. The beauty of cinematography is that everyone has their own styles, preferences, and opinions. Let me know in the comments down below what is most important to you when it comes to the final image. If you found any value in this video, please consider hitting the subscribe button and also the notification bell. It really helps the channel grow, and hopefully I'll be at my first milestone of 100 subscribers soon. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.